Today we're going to talk about how data is often skewed in our research when it comes to sexual behavior and what we need to pay attention to. And we're going to talk about in relationship to notch count today because I did a series of videos on promiscuity that were pretty popular, and some people were confused because if you do a Google search, it's going to tell you that women have slept with on average 6 to 8 people, and they don't tell you anything behind that data. Yet I'm making a claim that that data is inaccurate, and the number you really need to look to, I think, based on comparable reporting, is that I'm looking at if a girl was born after 1990, she has probably slept with between 20 and 50 people by the time she turns 30 years old. That's my estimate. Now, that is a very broad number, right? You got a range of 30 people there that she could, between 20 and 50. Plus, there's probably a standard deviation off of that, which I don't have necessarily because I'm making an educated guess. I'm making an educated guess based on field experience. Guys who are banging women in their 20s. Myself, who's banged and banging women in their 20s. Women I interact with who are in their 20s. And what they talk about with their girlfriends and what they talk about with me and how they present information. Information on forums and different things that will give you different test samples of where women are just talking about what is going on and what they're doing out there. These are all information and data pieces that contrast with the idea that women have slept with only 6 to 8 people. Okay? Now, some of the things about these studies that report that. Two things really important. One is most of these studies are out of date. So we're looking at decades old of information. Well, we're in a global sexual marketplace now where the internet is giving women more sexual access without social repercussions than ever before. So promiscuity and their notches have gone up, okay, because of that. We also need to look at underreporting. They've done other separate studies to show and demonstrate that women underreport in these studies. So when a woman says, I've slept with 8 people, she's not counting a bunch of oral, okay? She's not counting maybe experiences prior to when she turned 16. She's not counting vacation sex. She's not counting that one time she was drunk and she didn't really remember what happened, or that other time she was drunk but he didn't really finish because he was too drunk. You get where I'm going with this. Women have ways of rationalizing their number and bringing it and making it sound lower than what it actually is. So that's just the reality of it. That's part of their instinctual drive. They know that they're less valuable the more that notch goes up. And even in a study where that's supposed to be unbiased and they might not be reporting their name and all this, women tend to lie about that information. So do men, by the way. Men tend to inflate their number, whereas women tend to report less than what their number actually is. So that's a problem. We have this problem where the studies are not quite matching up. But out in the field, though, we know that these numbers are very different. And so when we look at that discrepancy and the incongruency, that's a real problem in analyzing the data. And here's where the biggest problem is. I'm not reporting these numbers in order to shame women, despite what some of you might think based on my comment section. And those comments aren't necessarily for me. There's a bit of women shaming that goes on in the comments. Whatever, right? It's just what it is. But I'm not putting the information out so that we shame women for being, garden tools. All right? That's not why I'm putting it out. I'm putting that information out so that we can have a realistic view of what women are doing, so that we can start from that standpoint and from a non-judgmental, neutral mindset, and then figure out what we're going to do with that information. It does the average girl who's 25 years old today no good to lie to everyone and say women are only sleeping with 6 to 8 people. And then maybe she slept with, let's say, 13 people, which is really a relatively low notch count compared to a lot of women from what I've seen and experienced in other reports and other studies. But the predominant reports say 6 to 8. Well, guys and other women are going to view her like she's overly promiscuous. They're going to view her in a different light when they think, or if they believe that women are only sleeping with 6 or 7 people on average, and she's at 25 and slept with 13, they're going to think that she's a garden tool, and she's actually not a garden tool. She's actually pretty well reserved compared to what other women are doing out there. And so you see how this having an unrealistic view actually doesn't help women at all. And it doesn't help men either. If a man runs into a woman who's 25 years old and she is honest about her experiences and even counts the oral and counts the vacation sex, and she tells him, well, yeah, I've slept with 21 people, he might be reluctant to be in any kind of commitment with her, when another woman could just be lying about her number, saying she slept with 8 people, and she really slept with just as many, and maybe has more problems pair bonding because of it. And so we're dealing with dishonesty that's in the reporting and dishonesty that's out there, which doesn't do men any good with approaching this topic objectively. And it doesn't do women any good either, because they're going to have a propensity to be looked at in a negative light or shamed for numbers that are relatively average. Now, I'm not saying that women shouldn't be held responsible for some of these numbers and some of the effects of those numbers. Not so much that, but the effects of their behavior. But understand, though, feminist ideology in society, their peer groups, everyone, including their own families nowadays, are telling them to go live their best life. You go get some D-girl. And so they go do that, rack up some notches. That doesn't make them a bad person necessarily. That makes them responding to the environment around them. Okay? In the environment that said that this is the road to happiness. Jump on the carousel, that's going to make you happy. And then they rack up some numbers, they do some stuff, and they're trying to figure it out just like everybody else, just like you and just like anybody. And now they're going to be looked at poorly because some study says women have only slept with 6 to 8 people. Right? And the study is obviously not accurate. So that's the problem, is that we don't have data that is good, because that's another thing, is that there's too much connotation and there's too much there's too much of a moral connotation and a value connotation put on these topics instead of approaching these topics objectively. So sexual scientists and social scientists are not approaching these topics in a manner where we could view the data objectively and actually figure out a way to collect the data to get more accurate information. So what we are out there doing is basically trying to collect data and getting stuff that's just inaccurate. And we can see this again when you actually are in the field. If you're actually getting laid with girls in their 20s, you're going to find out exactly what I'm saying is correct about 20 to 50 women, or 20 to 50 experiences. If you're actually talking and interacting with women in the West, in the United States, or places like the United States, you're going to find that these numbers are pretty accurate, okay? And I'll read an article that illustrates that. This is, again, would be a contrary data piece, and you'll see the contrarian information all around that really doesn't match with what's supposed to be objective data, which tells me that there's a lot of holes in those studies that are reporting these numbers of 6 to 8. So, from the article, many believe there's a stigma that surrounds the number of sexual partners that a woman has had. That was certainly the case for a Reddit user named Sarah Indipity, who asked women to reveal how many men they have really bedded. Ladies, how many people have you slept with? Is your number closer to what's considered socially acceptable, or is it higher? She asked the website. Women candidly revealed the number of men they had sex with. One woman even divulged that she had bedded over 100 men and had slept with 75 of those by the time she was 19 years old. I would consider her a bit of an anomaly. Many women admitted that they lost count. Okay, so that's really common. They lose count. They can't even give you an accurate number. If you slept with under 20 people, you can probably give an accurate number. If you're between 30 or 40 and 50, if you're in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it's less likely you're going to give an accurate number, right? I've slept with maybe a dozen guys. Maybe a dozen guys? Sorry, I have a horrible memory. You'll run into that all the time. Horrible memory. So what do you think they're doing on the study? I have a horrible memory. I think 7. Click, right? I confess I never thought about whether it's socially acceptable, one woman wrote. Another woman said, I don't know, I stopped counting around 30, and that was 9 years ago. A 33-year-old woman said, I stopped counting once I turned 30. I had something between 30 and 40 by the age of 25, the majority of which I got from the ages of 17 and 21. So what we're going to find as you go through these comments is another one. I'm a 23-year-old woman. I've slept with 32 people, another woman revealed. So when you go through comments in like a Reddit thing like that, or in forums or any of this stuff, if women are being accurate and honest, in today's day and age, there's less shaming over this information. Women tend to be more accurate about their numbers, and they tend to actually report things, and that's what you see. You see those numbers, 30, I don't remember, maybe this amount, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen. I stopped counting after 30 or 40. That was 9 years ago. I slept with, 32 people, and most of those were between the ages of 17 and 21. You will find that too, that most of these numbers are going to be condensed in ages in their younger years, their party years, okay? So their party years is when most of the promiscuity is happening. This is what we know and the red pill stuff, right? This is why it's red pill and why it's accurate and not fantasy information. We know that women are on the carousel, the promiscuity carousel, when they're younger, right? When they have the most amount of sexual access, and they're basically, their lady parts are screaming for them to get pregnant with the most genetically viable guys they can find, and they're just railing through dudes. They go through that period of a promiscuity phase. That's very common for girls. So what's common for girls nowadays is to go through that promiscuity phase when they're younger, rack up those numbers. And for women, it takes no talent for a woman to get laid if she's halfway decent looking. It's like zero talent. She can go into any place and walk out with a dude who's going to rail her out, right? Not a hard thing for a woman. And so for her to rack up 20 or 30 notches in a year or two is nothing. That's nothing. That's like that is rookie numbers for some people. Okay? It's very easy to do. All right, and most of them are not just going every day out and trying to rack up numbers, but during the ovulation cycle, when they feel horny and they're single, they go out and party with the girls, they have a little bit of drink, they maybe do a little bit of drugs or something, whatever, they're going someplace social, they're at the party or at the bar, and then they meet the hot guy, and then they make out with them, and they're in that 8 days of their cycle, their monthly cycle, where they're horny, and then they're banging, they found that guy to bang, and so then they bang him a bunch of times during that cycle, and then maybe it just doesn't go anywhere, and they don't care, or whatever, and then the next month it's the next thing. And so by the end of the year, they've done that a couple of times a month or once or twice a month, and they've racked up easily 20 partners in a year. That's what a girl could be doing during a promiscuous phase. I mean, this is very common stuff. This is common, and this is what we see in the field, but the data does not accurately report it. And so I am just estimating 20 to 50. Could that number be wrong if we had better data to prove that number wrong? Absolutely. I would change that estimation. Okay? I'm giving a number that I estimate when I have these discussions because it makes the most sense with what I see out in the field. Because if I know that the data that's being reported in a study is inaccurate, why am I going to rely then on that data for anything actionable? Doesn't make much sense, does it? So instead, I'm going to seek out the truth and look at what's going on. And if that means a series of anecdotal information that I have to go by a series of anecdotal information and reports, then that's what that means until we can have better studies that are done on this. So in absence of accurate, better data, I'm having to go with what is happening out in the field. I'm not seeing 100 by the 75 guys by the time she's 19 in most women out in the field. Now, a lot of you guys in the comments will say differently. I don't know why I would say that. I have a lot of experience with women, probably more than most guys that are going to be in the comments. I have seen and I've met and interacted with women who have had triple digit notch counts by the time they're in their early 20s. I have interacted with them. I know that that's a real thing. Okay, I know triple digit notch counts for women definitely happens, but I don't think that is the majority. That's just not what I'm seeing out there. Okay, I'm talking your average, halfway decent, normal chick living in Midtown USA, right? Or Midtown Canada, or, downtown, London, or whatever, just in a westernized country, all right, where they have Western values and, of course, gynocentric values infiltrating the value system, where promiscuity is being promoted and going through a garden tool phase or a promiscuous phase is promoted as something a girl should do. These are the numbers I'm seeing before they hit 30 years old. If they're born after 1990, it's between 20 and 50. That just seems to be the average number when you go through all of this information. And so that's the number I'm using. But my point is that sometimes when we try to do sexual research and we look at the actual data and the studies are not accurately portraying the reality that's out there. We also see this in sports all the time, in sports psychology, okay? Or in sports, like sports physiology, exercise science. What I mean to say, exercise science, is we'll see people doing things out in the field that's working for them out in the field, but the data hasn't caught up or hasn't accurately portrayed that yet because they can't recreate that stuff in a lab, or they just haven't had anybody study it or attack that topic in a way that it needs to be attacked. So this happens a lot with our sexual behavior. It happens a lot because in academia, there's a very moralistic and view and sometimes value connotations that get put on this research. So the researchers have a certain set of values that they place on the research that they're doing, and it greatly skews the data. It becomes there is a bias, a researcher's bias that happens a lot of times. And so whenever we see out in the field things that are not matching what the research and data is showing, we have to pick apart that data then. We have to look at those studies and go, okay, why is this different? And as it turns out, there's probably a research bias in promiscuity studies or studies that are, looking at sexual behavior, and we're not adjusting or mitigating for underreporting for women with these notch count questions. Okay, and that's what seems to be the case. And in a lot of it is, too, we're not doing recent studies. Most of the studies I see are 20 years old or longer. I mean, they're decades old. Well, a girl who was turning 30 20 years ago, prior to dating apps and Adult Friend Finder and all of this access that's out there, it's not just sexual access, because women have always had sexual access, but it's sexual access without social consequences or negative social consequences. It's way more accelerated now than it was 20 years ago. So that's going to skew our reporting. So just understand that I'm using data, I'm using points that are useful based on information that we have, and there may or may not be a strong amount of research to go by. Some of that, like in the case of notch count studies, I don't feel like we have a strong enough body of research behind it, because the research we have is very inaccurate. It doesn't match what we're getting in reports from the field. So I have to come up with a number that makes the most sense based on the information that we have in order to action our strategy and information. Because who cares whether the average number of dudes women slept with is between 15 and 35 or 20 and 50 or 22 and 41. Like, really, does it matter? It doesn't. What matters is the fact that their notches are going up and that there are consequences to that. The consequences are going to vary per woman, and so we have to figure out how to vet out accordingly and how to respond to that to the new environment we're in the global sexual marketplace. We have to learn how to handle women and handle our relationships with what is going on in the current sexual market. That's all it is. It doesn't matter. Getting hung up on this number or that number actually isn't helping us very much. Now, of course, I think that if the data was accurate, that women were only sleeping with 6 or 7 people on average, and that would include the most sexually marketable that are out there, versus an average between 20 and 50. I mean, if we found out that those studies were actually accurate and they could mitigate for all that, that might change a lot of ideas. It might change a lot of things we approach, which is fine. I mean, that's totally fine. I'm all for changing ideas as new information and more accurate information comes out. Okay, we're going to action things based on the best information we have, but we always have to be willing to shift gears when better information comes out. But I don't think we're going to find that. I really don't think we're going to find that with most young girls, that the average for the top 2/3, we'll say, of sexually marketable girls is between 6 and 8. I don't think we're going to find that. I think we're going to find that most girls within that top 2/3 of sexually marketable category, the ones that are capable of getting laid and the ones that go out and do so, are doing so pretty frequently and racking up those notches quite a little bit more than they've ever had in history. I think that's just what we're going to find. Okay, so hopefully that helps clear out some of these arguments and discussions, because we have to approach this stuff from a practical standpoint. I'm a realist, and I approach things practically, and I approach things by wanting to get actionable results. I'm not just sitting here mentally jerking off and trying to jerk off with a bunch of information and data that we can't really do anything with. And to me, a study or even a series of studies that doesn't adjust or mitigate for misreporting, okay, and studies that are out of date, and studies that don't narrow the test sample for sexual marketability, those studies that report 6 to 8 partners with women are about useless, because they're not making those proper adjustments for it to even make sense or be accurate from what you guys are going to run into when you're out in the dating market. So what is the point of having that study at all if it's useless, right? Or using those numbers for anything if they are useless, inaccurate numbers? There is no point. So we will use what we can garnish and gather is accurate information until proven otherwise. Thanks again, guys, for the support.